I pulled into my driveway after 3 weeks of hell, and the first thing I saw was the massive "Sold" sign planted in my front yard like a tombstone. For a moment, I thought I was hallucinating. Sleep deprivation does that to you when you've spent 21 consecutive days and nights in a hospital room, watching monitors, counting heartbeats, praying your husband doesn't die in front of you. But the sign was real. Bright red letters against white. Sold. Closing in 30 days. Hartford Realty. My hands started shaking on the steering wheel. This was my house, my Victorian restoration project that I'd spent 18 months and $400,000 renovating. The house I'd bought with my own money from my first commercial real estate deal 30 years ago. The house where I'd raised Ethan, where Richard and I had celebrated 32 anniversaries, where every corner held a memory I'd built with my own hands and my own sweat. I sat there in my BMW, engine still running, staring at that sign. My mind went blank. Then it went into overdrive, cycling through possibilities. Mistake. Had to be a mistake. Someone put the sign on the wrong property. Hartford Realty screwed up. That was the only explanation that made sense. Then I heard the laughter. Male voices, loud and celebratory, coming from my front porch. I turned off the engine and got out of the car, legs unsteady beneath me. I hadn't slept more than 3 hours at a stretch in 3 weeks. I was wearing the same yoga pants and Columbia sweatshirt I'd been living in at the hospital. My hair was pulled back in a greasy ponytail. I looked like hell, and I knew it. The laughter got louder as I walked up the brick pathway I'd laid myself 7 years ago. And then I saw them. Ethan, my son, my only child, sitting in one of the white rocking chairs on the porch, beer in hand, grinning like he'd just won the lottery. Next to him sat Darren Kovach, my son's father-in-law, a man I'd privately nicknamed the Parasite within 3 months of meeting him. 61 years old, unemployed for the past 4 years, with slicked back gray hair that always looked slightly greasy and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. He was wearing too much gold jewelry and cologne I could smell from 15 feet away. And Marlena, Ethan's wife of 2 years, was leaning against the porch railing with her phone out, taking selfies with the 2 men in the background. She was wearing a new designer sundress I'd never seen before. Hermes, if I had to guess. At least $3,000. They were celebrating something. That much was obvious. Ethan? My voice came out hoarse. I'd been crying on and off for 3 weeks, and my throat was raw from it. My son's head whipped around, and for just a fraction of a second I saw something cross his face. Guilt, maybe, or fear. But then it was gone, replaced by this forced cheerfulness that made my stomach turn. "Mom, you're home. I didn't expect you until tomorrow. How's Dad?" How's Dad? Like he actually cared. Like he hadn't visited Richard exactly twice in 3 weeks. Once for 20 minutes, once for 15. Both times checking his watch the entire time, eager to leave. I ignored the question and pointed at the sign. "What the hell is that?" Ethan stood up, setting his beer down on the small table between the rocking chairs. "Mom, okay, listen. I can explain everything. Just, let's go inside and talk about this calmly." Explain what exactly? My voice was getting louder. I couldn't help it. 3 weeks of terror and exhaustion were catching up with me all at once. Why is there a "Sold" sign on my house? Darren stood up too, and that oily smile spread across his face. "Vivian, hey, good to see you. Listen, why don't we all just take a breath here and—" "I'm not talking to you," I cut him off. My eyes stayed locked on Ethan. "I'm talking to my son. What did you do?" Marlena finally lowered her phone, and I saw her exchange a quick glance with her father. Something passed between them. A signal, a warning. I'd seen them do this before at family dinners, these silent communications that excluded everyone else. Ethan ran his hand through his hair, a nervous habit he'd had since he was 7 years old. "Mom, there was an emergency, a serious emergency. I tried calling you like 50 times, but you never picked up." "I was in surgery with your father," I said, my voice dropping to something cold and hard. He was having a quadruple bypass. I told you that. I texted you that. You knew I couldn't answer my phone. I know. And I'm so sorry about Dad. I really am. Ethan was talking fast now, words tumbling over each other. But this couldn't wait. Darren was in serious trouble, Mom, like life-threatening trouble. I finally let myself look at Darren. He had the decency to look down at his shoes for a second before meeting my eyes again. I had some bad luck, Vivian. Got in over my head with some people who don't play around. These weren't the kind of guys you can negotiate with or reason with. They gave me a deadline, and I didn't have the money. What kind of trouble? I asked, even though I already knew. I'd known about Darren's gambling problem since before Ethan and Marlena got engaged. I'd done my research, credit checks, background checks, the works. Darren Kovac had been addicted to gambling for at least 15 years. Casinos, sports betting, underground poker games. He owed money to everyone. I'd found records of debts in 3 different states. Does it matter? Marlena spoke up for the first time, her voice defensive. My father could have been killed, Vivian. Literally killed. These people don't mess around. And so you sold my house? I looked at Ethan again. That was your solution? Sell my house without asking me? I tried to ask you. Ethan's voice cracked. I called you over and over. I left messages. I texted. But you never responded, and we were running out of time. They gave him until Friday. That was 3 days ago, Mom. I didn't have a choice. You didn't have a choice, I repeated slowly. You didn't have a choice except to forge my signature and sell my house? The color drained from Ethan's face. I didn't forge anything. I used the power of attorney documents. The ones from when you and Dad went to Italy last year, remember? You left me with power of attorney in case anything came up with your properties while you were gone. I felt ice water flood through my veins. Those documents. I'd completely forgotten about those documents. Limited power of attorney for 60 days, allowing Ethan to handle basic maintenance issues or sign routine paperwork if needed. They'd been filed with my attorney. I'd never revoked them because I never thought I'd need to. I never imagined my own son would use them to steal from me. Those were for emergencies, I said quietly. For the properties, for business. Not for selling my personal residence. This was an emergency. Ethan was almost shouting now. They were going to kill him, Mom. What was I supposed to do? Let Marlena's father die? You were supposed to call the police, I said. You were supposed to let him face the consequences of his own choices. You were supposed to do literally anything except steal from your own mother while she was watching her husband almost die. I wasn't stealing, Ethan said, but his voice had lost its conviction. I was going to explain everything. I was going to work out a payment plan with you. We were going to buy the house back in 6 months, a year tops. I have it all figured out. I laughed. I couldn't help it. It came out harsh and bitter. You have it all figured out. You, who's asked me for money every single month for the past 2 years. You, who I found out last year was 3 months behind on your rent before I paid it off. You who maxed out the credit card I gave you for emergencies and then opened 2 more in your name that you defaulted on. You have it all figured out. Ethan's face flushed red. That's not fair. You don't know what it's like trying to build a life in this economy. Everything costs so much, and my salary doesn't go as far as— How much? I interrupted. How much did you sell my house for? He hesitated. Looked at Darren, looked at Marlena, finally mumbled, 2.1 million. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. 2.1 million. This house is worth 2.4 million minimum. I had it appraised 8 months ago. You sold it for 300,000 under value. We needed to close fast, Darren spoke up. Quick sale, cash buyers. They were willing to close in 30 days if we gave them a good price. We, I said, turning to look at him directly. Interesting word choice. We, like you had any right to make decisions about my property. Darren held up his hands. Hey, I'm just trying to explain the situation. Ethan made the decisions here. I was grateful for his help. How much did you owe? I asked him. How much was my son's inheritance worth to you? Darren's smile flickered. It was $180,000, plus interest. It added up to about $200,000 total. $200,000, I repeated. I looked at Ethan. So you sold my $2.4 million house for $2.1 million to cover his $200,000 gambling debt. And what happened to the other $1,900,000? Ethan's eyes widened. It's in an account. A safe account. I was going to tell you about it. I was going to give it all back, every penny. I just needed to wait until Dad was better and you weren't so stressed and— Stop lying, I said quietly. Stop lying to me right now. Where's the money? Marlena shifted uncomfortably. Her phone had disappeared into her designer handbag. She wasn't taking selfies anymore. There were expenses, Ethan said finally. Real estate fees, closing costs, legal fees. And Darren needed a little extra to get back on his feet, to make sure he didn't end up in the same situation again. And Marlena and we've been struggling, and I thought, how much is left? I asked. My voice was absolutely flat now. No emotion. I'd gone past anger into something else, something cold and clear and sharp. About $800,000, Ethan whispered. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, opened them again. So let me make sure I understand this correctly, I said. While I was at the hospital watching your father fight for his life, you took power of attorney documents that I gave you in good faith, used them to sell my house at below market value, gave $200,000 of my money to your father-in-law to pay off his gambling debts, and then split the remaining $1 million plus 3 ways between yourself, your wife, and her father. Did I get that right? Nobody answered. And then, I continued, my voice still eerily calm, when I came home, exhausted and traumatized and barely holding myself together, I found you 3 sitting on my porch, drinking beer and taking selfies, celebrating your big score. It wasn't like that, Marlena said quickly. We weren't celebrating. We were just relieved that everything worked out, that my father was safe. We were going to tell you everything. When? I asked. When were you going to tell me? Before or after the closing? Before or after you'd spent all my money? We were waiting for the right time, Ethan said. He was crying now, tears running down his face. Mom, please. I know this looks bad. I know I messed up, but I was trying to help. I was trying to save Darren's life. I was trying to be the man of the family while Dad was sick. I was trying to step up and handle things. By stealing from me, I said. I wasn't stealing, Ethan insisted. I was borrowing. I was going to pay it all back. I swear on my life, Mom, I was going to make this right. I looked at my son. Really looked at him. 29 years old. The baby I'd carried for 9 months, the child I'd nursed and raised and loved more than my own life. The boy I'd protected from every hardship, every consequence, every difficult lesson. The young man I'd bailed out again and again and again, always telling myself it was just one more time, just until he got on his feet, just until he matured a little more. And I saw him clearly for the first time in maybe his entire life. He wasn't going to pay me back. He never intended to pay me back. In his mind, it was already his money. I was his mother, which meant what was mine was his. I'd taught him that, hadn't I? Every time I'd rescued him, every time I'd written a check to solve his problems, every time I'd made his mistakes disappear, I'd taught him that there were no real consequences, not for him, not when he had me. I smiled. It must have been a terrible smile, because I watched Ethan take an actual step backward. That's funny, I said softly. That's really funny, actually. Ethan wiped his eyes. What is? All of this. I gestured at the 3 of them, at the sold sign, at the house behind us. You thinking you pulled off some kind of clever scheme? You sitting here celebrating like you actually won something? Darren's smile had completely disappeared now. He was watching me with narrow eyes, and I could see his brain working, trying to figure out what I knew that he didn't. Mom, what are you talking about? Ethan asked. His voice had a tremor in it. I pulled my phone out of my purse, scrolled through my contacts, found the number I was looking for, hit dial, and put it on speaker. It rang 3 times before a familiar voice answered. Vivienne, is everything okay? Is Richard all right? Hi, Gregory, I said. Richard's fine. He's stable. But I need you to explain something to my son. Can you do that for me? Of course, Gregory Sterling said, my attorney for the past 15 years. The man who'd set up all my trusts, all my estate planning, all my asset protection strategies. What does Ethan need to know? I looked at my son's confused face. Can you explain to Ethan what property the house in Greenwich is actually titled under? There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then Gregory's voice came back, professional and measured. The property at 47 Birchwood Lane in Greenwich, Connecticut, was placed into the Hartwell Family Irrevocable Trust in March of 2017. That's 8 years ago. You are the lifetime beneficiary, Vivienne, but the property is owned by the trust itself. You have the right to occupy and use the property, but you don't have the legal authority to sell it without the approval of the trust's board, which consists of yourself, Richard, and myself. Ethan's face was starting to change, going from confused to worried to scared. And Gregory, I continued, still watching my son, what would it mean if someone used power of attorney documents to sell trust property? That would be fraud, Gregory said immediately. The power of attorney documents give authority to handle your personal affairs, not to make decisions about trust property. Any sale conducted under those circumstances would be void. The buyer would have no legal claim to the property, and the person who executed the sale could be charged with fraud, forgery, and potentially federal crimes if the transaction crossed state lines or involved wire transfers. The color drained completely from Ethan's face. We're talking about serious charges, Gregory continued. 10 to 20 years in federal prison potentially, plus civil liability for damages, legal fees, and restitution to all parties involved. I ended the call, slipped the phone back into my purse. The silence on the porch was absolute. Mom, Ethan whispered. Mom, please. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know about the trust. You never told me. I established that trust when you were 21 years old, I said. I sent you a letter explaining it. I have a copy of that letter in my files, with your signature on a receipt confirming you received it. You knew, Ethan. You just didn't think it mattered. Darren was backing toward the porch steps now. I should go. This is a family matter. I shouldn't be here. Oh, you're not going anywhere, I said. I pulled my phone out again and dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? Yes, I need to report a fraud, I said clearly. Multiple frauds, actually. Someone forged documents to sell my property without authorization. I have the perpetrators here with me now, and I need police to come take statements. Mom, no! Ethan lurched forward, reaching for my phone. You can't do this. I'm your son. I stepped back, keeping the phone to my ear. Yes, that's correct. 47 Birchwood Lane in Greenwich. My name is Vivienne Hartwell. I own the property, and I'm reporting that my son, Ethan Hartwell, fraudulently sold it using falsified authority. Marlena was crying now, mascara running down her face. Darren had gone completely still, his face gray. And Ethan, my son, my baby. He was staring at me like he'd never seen me before. They're sending officers now, the dispatcher said. Please stay on the line and remain in a safe location. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. I'll be here. I looked at the 3 of them and thought about Richard lying in that hospital bed, machines beeping around him, his chest cracked open and sewn back together. I thought about the 3 weeks I'd spent there, terrified and alone, while my son was here planning how to rob me blind. And I smiled again. That same terrible smile. You know what's really funny? I said quietly. I would have given you the money. If you'd asked me honestly, told me the situation, I would have paid off those debts. I would have helped you. Because that's what I always do, isn't it? I always help you, Ethan. No matter what. My son's face crumpled. Mom, please, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I'll make it right. I'll find a way to make it right. You can't, I said simply. It's too late for that now. In the distance, I heard sirens starting to wail. I sat in the back of the police cruiser watching them load Ethan into a separate vehicle, and my mind went to places I'd spent 30 years trying to avoid. The truth I'd been running from since the day he was born. I'd failed him. Not today. Not yesterday. 29 years ago, when I'd held that perfect baby in my arms and made a promise to myself that he would never struggle the way I had. I grew up in a 2-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn with parents who spoke broken English and worked 3 jobs between them to keep food on the table. My father cleaned office buildings at night. My mother sewed garments in a factory during the day and cleaned houses on weekends. I wore secondhand clothes and learned to do my homework in public libraries because our apartment was too loud, too crowded, too chaotic. I was hungry a lot as a kid. Not starving, but that constant low-level hunger where you're always thinking about the next meal, always calculating if there's enough. I watched my parents age 20 years in 10, their backs bent, their hands rough, their eyes tired, and I promised myself I would never live like that. My children would never live like that. I got a scholarship to community college, studied business at night while working as a receptionist during the day. Met Richard when I was 25 at an open house for a building I was trying to rent office space in. He'd designed it. He was 32, already making a name for himself as an architect who could blend historic preservation with modern functionality. He asked me to dinner after the showing. I said yes because he had kind eyes and didn't look at me like I was just a poor girl from Brooklyn trying to play in a rich person's world. We got married 6 months later in a small ceremony at City Hall. My parents were thrilled. Richard came from a good family, had a good education, a good career. They thought I'd made it. I got pregnant with Ethan a year into our marriage. Richard was overjoyed. I was terrified. I'd just started my own real estate business. Tiny operation, just me and one assistant, working out of a cramped office in Queens. I was 27 years old, finally starting to build something, and suddenly I was going to be a mother. I didn't know how to be a mother. My own mother had loved me fiercely, but had been too exhausted to actually parent most of the time. But when they placed Ethan in my arms, this tiny perfect person who depended on me for everything, I felt something shift in my chest. A determination so fierce it was almost violent. This child would have everything. Everything I didn't have. Everything my parents couldn't give me. Richard and I bought our first house when Ethan was 2. A modest 3-bedroom in a good school district. I was making decent money by then, flipping small properties and managing a handful of rental units. Richard's architecture firm was growing. We weren't rich, but we were comfortable. More comfortable than I'd ever been in my life. I put Ethan in the best preschool I could afford. When he fell and scraped his knee on the playground, I was the mother who showed up with the expensive first aid kit and the organic snacks. When he struggled with reading in 1st grade, I hired a private tutor. When he didn't make the soccer team in 4th grade, I found a private coach to work with him. Richard started warning me around that time. We were in bed one night, Ethan asleep down the hall, and Richard said quietly, "Viv, you're hovering. You need to let him fail sometimes. Let him figure things out on his own." "He's 9 years old," I'd said. "He's a baby. He's a kid who needs to learn resilience. You can't solve every problem for him." But I didn't listen. Because every time Ethan struggled with something, every time he faced a challenge or a disappointment, I saw myself at his age, hungry, scared, helpless. And I couldn't let him feel that way. I couldn't. By the time Ethan was in high school, I'd built a successful commercial real estate portfolio. Multiple properties, steady income, real wealth for the first time in my life. We moved to Greenwich into a historic Victorian that needed massive restoration work. Richard supervised the project himself, and I poured money into it. $400,000 to restore it to its former glory. Ethan got into good colleges. Not Harvard or Yale like some of his classmates, but solid schools. He chose a state university because his girlfriend at the time was going there. Richard thought we should let him make that choice and live with it. I thought we should encourage him to reconsider, maybe visit some of the better schools again. We compromised by letting him choose the state school, but buying him a condo near campus so he wouldn't have to live in the dorms. Just so he can focus on his studies, I told Richard. Less distractions. Richard gave me this look, this sad, knowing look. But he didn't argue. Ethan changed his major 3 times. Dropped classes, retook them. What should have been 4 years turned into 5.5. He graduated with a degree in communications and no real plan for what came next. He moved back home and spent 6 months figuring things out, which mostly meant sleeping until noon and playing video games. I got him an interview at a friend's marketing firm. He lasted 8 months before they let him go. He said it was a bad fit, that his boss didn't appreciate his ideas. I believed him because I wanted to believe him. I wrote him a check to cover expenses while he looked for something else. He started a social media consulting business with 2 friends from college. I invested $50,000 as seed money. The business folded within a year. The friends moved on to other things. Ethan moved back home again. He needs to hit bottom, Richard said one night after Ethan had borrowed the car for the 3rd time that week and brought it back with an empty gas tank. You keep giving him soft landings, and he's never going to learn to fly. He's trying, I'd said defensively. The economy is tough for young people. It's not like when we started out. Viv, Richard had said gently, when you started out, you were working 60-hour weeks and eating ramen for dinner. When I started out, I was sleeping on a friend's couch and taking any project I could get. Ethan has never had to struggle because you won't let him struggle. We'd fought about it, one of our worst fights in 30 years of marriage. I'd accused Richard of being too hard on our son. He'd accused me of infantilizing Ethan. We didn't speak for 2 days. Then Ethan met Marlena. She was pretty, charming, always perfectly made up and dressed in expensive clothes that seemed beyond what her job as a part-time social media influencer should afford. Ethan was smitten within weeks, obsessed within months. Richard and I met her parents at the engagement dinner. Her mother was quiet, worn down, the kind of exhaustion I recognized from my own mother's eyes. Her father was Darren Kovach, and I disliked him on sight. Too much cologne, too much jewelry, too many stories about deals that had just fallen through and opportunities that were right around the corner. He ordered the most expensive wine on the menu and made jokes about how the ladies are letting us men pick up the tab tonight, right, buddy? While nudging Ethan. I did a background check the next day. I'm not proud of it, but I did it anyway. Credit score in the low 500s, 2 bankruptcies, a pattern of debts and defaults going back 15 years, addresses in 4 different states, and gambling. So much gambling. Court records showed judgments from 3 different casinos, small claims cases from poker debts. I showed the report to Richard. He read it quietly, then looked up at me. What do you want to do with this? I want to show it to Ethan. I want him to know what he's getting involved with. You know he won't listen, Richard said. He's in love. If you try to break them up, you'll just push him closer to her. So we do nothing? We just let him marry into this family? Richard sighed. Viv, he's 27 years old. He's not a child anymore. This is his choice to make. Even if it's the wrong choice. Especially if it's the wrong choice. That's how people learn. But I couldn't do nothing. I tried talking to Ethan, gentle hints at first. Are you sure you want to rush into marriage? Maybe live together first, see how it goes? He'd gotten defensive immediately. Why don't you like Marlena? She's been nothing but nice to you. I tried being more direct. Ethan, I'm concerned about Marlena's father. He seems to have some financial problems that might affect you. Ethan had blown up at me. That's incredibly classist, Mom. Not everyone has money like you do. Darren's had some bad luck, but he's a good guy. And I love Marlena. I thought you'd be happy for me. Richard had given me that look again. The "I told you so" look that he was too kind to ever actually say out loud. They got married in a lavish ceremony that cost me $80,000. Marlena wanted everything perfect, and Ethan wanted to give her everything perfect, and I couldn't say no without looking like the villain. Darren gave a toast at the reception about how lucky he was to have such a generous family now, and I'd had to excuse myself to the bathroom to keep from saying something I'd regret. The money request started almost immediately. "Just a loan, Mom, until I get my bonus. Just to cover first and last month's rent on the new apartment. Just to help with the wedding debt we're still carrying. Just. Always just." I gave it to him every time. Sometimes I made him sign promissory notes. Sometimes I pretended it was a gift. It didn't matter. The money flowed one direction only, and we both knew he'd never pay it back. Richard stopped talking to me about it after a while. Not because he was angry, but because he knew I wouldn't listen. He'd just sigh when I told him about another loan, another gift, another bailout. He'd kiss my forehead and say, "Your money, your choice, love." 6 months ago, Richard had his first small heart attack. Warning signs, the doctors called it. "We need you to reduce stress," they said. "Change your diet, exercise more, take these medications." He recovered quickly, but it scared us both. Richard was only 59, too young for heart problems. We started talking about retirement, about slowing down, about actually enjoying the life we'd built. And then, 3 weeks ago, Richard collapsed in his home office. Massive heart attack. By the time the ambulance got him to St. Vincent's, his heart had stopped twice. They did emergency surgery, quadruple bypass. The surgeon told me he'd been minutes away from dying. I called Ethan from the hospital waiting room, my hands shaking so hard I could barely hold the phone. "It's Dad. It's really bad. I need you here." He'd shown up 4 hours later, stayed for 20 minutes, said he had an important meeting at work, promised he'd come back soon. He didn't come back for 5 days. The police officer who'd been taking notes in his cruiser opened the door now, pulling me back to the present. "Mrs. Hartwell, we need to take your full statement inside. Are you ready?" I looked at the house one more time. My house that wasn't really sold. My house that I'd protected years ago with legal structures precisely because I knew, on some level, that this moment might come. Maybe not this exact moment, but something like it. "Yes," I said. "I'm ready." The police station was exactly what you'd expect. Fluorescent lights that made everyone look slightly gray, institutional green walls that had probably been painted in 1987, and that particular smell of burnt coffee mixed with industrial cleaning solution. They put me in an interview room with a detective named Sarah Morrison, a woman in her early 40s with tired eyes and a wedding ring that looked like it had been twisted around her finger 1,000 times from stress. "Mrs. Hartwell, I know this is difficult," she said, setting a voice recorder on the table between us. "Take your time. Tell me everything from the beginning." So I did. I told her about the power of attorney documents from last year's Italy trip, about Richard's heart attack, about the 3 weeks at the hospital, about coming home to find my house sold and my son celebrating on the porch with the man who'd orchestrated the whole thing. Detective Morrison took notes, asked clarifying questions, her expression neutral, but her eyes sharp. When I finished, she sat back in her chair. "And you're certain the property was in a trust that your son had no authority to sell?" "I have all the documentation. My attorney can provide everything you need. The trust was established 8 years ago. Ethan was notified in writing. I have his signed receipt." "Why did you set up the trust?" she asked. It wasn't an accusatory question, just curious. I thought about how to answer that honestly. Because I'm a successful woman with substantial assets, and I wanted to protect what I'd built. Trusts protect property from lawsuits, from creditors, from bad decisions. I set up several of them over the years for different properties and assets. What I didn't say was that some part of me, even 8 years ago, had known I needed to protect myself from my own son. I hadn't wanted to admit it then. I didn't want to admit it now. Detective Morrison nodded slowly. Mrs. Hartwell, I need to be honest with you. Cases like this, especially within families, they're complicated. The district attorney might be reluctant to prosecute your own son. Why? I asked flatly. He committed fraud. He forged documents. He stole over $2 million worth of property. If a stranger had done this, you'd arrest them immediately. You're right, she said. But you're his mother. Prosecutors worry that mothers will change their minds, refuse to testify, reconcile with their children, and drop charges. It happens all the time in family cases. I looked her directly in the eyes. I won't change my mind. Something in my voice must have convinced her because she nodded and made another note. Okay, we'll move forward. I'll need you to provide all the trust documents, the power of attorney paperwork, any communication with your son about the property. The more documentation, the stronger the case. I have everything. My attorney is preparing a complete file. What about the buyers? Detective Morrison asked. The people who thought they were purchasing the house? My stomach dropped. In all the chaos and anger, I'd almost forgotten about them. I don't know who they are. I haven't seen the sale documents yet. We'll need to track them down. They're victims in this too. They're going to lose their deposit, possibly more if they've already started making arrangements based on this purchase. I thought about that for a moment. Some innocent family who thought they were buying their dream home, who had probably been saving for years, who were now going to have their lives turned upside down because of my son's criminality. I want to make them whole, I said. Whatever they've lost in deposits or fees, I'll cover it. Detective Morrison raised her eyebrows. That's generous, but you don't have to do that. You're the victim here too. I know, but they didn't do anything wrong. They shouldn't suffer because my son is a thief. She studied me for a long moment, then nodded. We'll get their information and put you in contact once we've taken their statements. The interview lasted another hour. By the time I walked out of the police station, it was nearly 8 o'clock at night. I'd been awake for over 24 hours straight. My phone had 17 missed calls, 12 from Ethan's number, 3 from Marlena, 2 from a number I didn't recognize that might have been Darren. I listened to one of Ethan's voicemails. Mom, please, you have to drop the charges. They're saying I could go to prison. Real prison, Mom. For years. I made a mistake. I know I made a mistake. But I'm your son. You can't do this to me. Please call me back. Please. I deleted it and blocked his number. The hospital was 15 minutes from the police station. I drove there on autopilot, my brain too exhausted to process everything that had happened. When I walked into Richard's room, he was awake, sitting up slightly in bed, reading something on his tablet. He looked up when I came in, and his face immediately creased with concern. Viv, Jesus, what happened? You look like hell. I sat down in the chair next to his bed and started crying. Not the quiet, dignified crying I'd been doing for 3 weeks, full body sobs that shook my shoulders and made it hard to breathe. Richard reached for my hand, his grip weak but steady, and waited for me to calm down enough to talk. When I finally could speak, I told him everything. The sold sign, Ethan and Darren on the porch, the fraudulent sale, the police station, all of it. Richard's face went through several emotions as I talked: shock, anger, grief, and finally, something that looked like resignation. I knew something was wrong, he said quietly when I finished. When he kept asking me about the properties while I was here, which ones were in your name, which ones were in trusts, how much they were worth. I thought he was just worried about our finances, about what would happen if I died. I didn't realize he was planning something. He asked you about the properties? Fresh anger flooded through me. While you were recovering from open-heart surgery? He tried to be subtle about it, but yeah. Richard closed his eyes. God, Viv, I'm so sorry. I should have warned you. I should have known what he was planning. This isn't your fault, I said immediately. You were fighting for your life. You can't blame yourself for not seeing this coming." "Can't I?" Richard opened his eyes and looked at me. We both knew what he was becoming. We've known for years. I just didn't want to believe our son could do something like this. We sat in silence for a while. The machines beeped steadily. Nurses moved past the door. Finally, Richard said, "What are you going to do?" "I pressed charges. The detective thinks he'll be arrested tomorrow once they process all the paperwork." Richard nodded slowly. "Good." I looked at him in surprise. "Good?" "Yeah." His voice was firm despite the weakness in his body. "I love our son, Viv. I'll always love him. But what he did was unforgivable. He needs to face real consequences for once in his life. Maybe this is the only way he'll ever learn." "He could go to prison for years," I said quietly. "The detective said 10 to 20 years potentially." "I know." Richard's eyes were wet now. "And that breaks my heart. But you know what breaks my heart more? The thought of him doing this again in 5 years, 10 years, to someone else. The thought of him becoming his father-in-law, a con artist who uses people and throws them away. If prison is what it takes to wake him up, then so be it." I squeezed his hand. This was why I'd married him 32 years ago. Because even when things were impossibly hard, even when we were both breaking, he could see clearly and speak truth. "How are you feeling?" I asked, changing the subject to something I could actually control. "Pain levels okay?" "I'm fine. Stop trying to distract me. We need to talk about what happens next." "What do you mean?" "Marlena," Richard said. "Darren, the money, all of it. We need to have a plan." So we talked strategy for the next 2 hours. Richard, even flat on his back recovering from major surgery, was still the sharpest person I knew. We mapped out everything. Contact the buyers and offer restitution. Work with Gregory to ensure the trust documentation was airtight. Prepare for the reality that Ethan would probably turn on Darren to get a lighter sentence. Figure out what to do about Marlena, who was legally our daughter-in-law, but morally complicit in the whole scheme. By the time visiting hours ended at 10 o'clock, I had a plan. It wasn't a good plan. It wasn't a plan that made me feel anything but sick to my stomach. But it was a plan. I went home to our other house in Westport, the one Ethan didn't know about because I'd bought it through a different LLC 5 years ago as an investment property. Richard and I had been planning to move there for retirement, but we'd kept it quiet because I'd learned the hard way that Ethan saw any asset I acquired as something he was entitled to. The house was smaller than Greenwich, but elegant. Modern construction, floor-to-ceiling windows, a view of Long Island Sound. I took a long shower, washing 3 weeks of hospital grime off my skin, and fell into bed. I thought I was too exhausted and wired to sleep, but I was unconscious within minutes. My phone woke me at 6:30 in the morning. Gregory Sterling. "Vivian, we need to meet today. I've been reviewing the documents from the sale, and there are some things you need to know." We met at his office in Stamford at 9. Gregory had been my attorney since I'd first started making real money 15 years ago. He was 52, razor sharp, and had never once let me down. His office was all dark wood and leather chairs, walls lined with law books he probably never opened anymore because everything was digital now. He spread documents across his conference table. "This is worse than we thought," he said, without preamble. "The buyers paid the full $2.1 million, $100,000 deposit, then the remaining $2 million at what they thought was closing. That money went into an escrow account controlled by Hartford Realty." "Okay," I said slowly. "So we reverse the sale, return their money?" "It's not that simple. Hartford Realty has already disbursed the funds. $200,000 went to an account in Darren Kovac's name at a casino in Atlantic City to pay off his markers. That money is gone. The casino released it to creditors immediately. Another $200,000 was wired to an offshore account we're still trying to trace. The remaining $1,600,000 was split between 3 different accounts. One in Ethan's name, one in Marlena's name, one in Darren's name again." How much is left? I asked, though I was afraid of the answer. Gregory pulled up a spreadsheet on his laptop. Based on bank records we've subpoenaed through the police investigation, Ethan's account has about $400,000 left. He spent $100,000 on what appears to be cryptocurrency investments, $50,000 on a car, a Tesla Model S bought 3 days ago, and another $50,000 on various purchases: clothes, electronics, expensive dinners. I closed my eyes. $600,000 spent in less than 3 weeks. What about Marlena's account? $300,000 remaining. She spent $100,000 on what looks like Louis Vuitton and Hermes purchases based on the credit card statements. Another $70,000 on something called Bright Smile Dental Spa, cosmetic dentistry, veneers probably. Various other luxury purchases. And Darren? His account has $50,000 left. He spent the rest at casinos, online gambling sites, sports betting. He went through $450,000 in 17 days. I felt like I'd been punched. So out of $2.1 million, only about $750,000 is recoverable. Correct. And that's before legal fees, before restitution to the buyers, before any of this goes to trial. Vivienne, your son and his in-laws have effectively stolen and spent over $1.3 million in less than a month. I sat back in the leather chair, took a deep breath, let it out slowly. Okay, what are our options? Gregory leaned forward. We pursue full criminal prosecution. Based on the amounts involved and the interstate wire transfers, this is federal jurisdiction. The FBI will get involved. Ethan, Marlena, and Darren will all be charged. Given the evidence, we're looking at guilty pleas or quick convictions. Sentencing guidelines for this amount of fraud are significant. How significant? Ethan and Darren could each get 10 to 15 years. Marlena might get less if she cooperates and claims she was manipulated by her father. 5 to 8 years, possibly. The room was very quiet. I could hear traffic outside, 19 floors below, someone's phone ringing in a nearby office, the air conditioning humming. There's something else, Gregory said carefully. The buyers, Tom and Jennifer Mitchell, young couple, both teachers, 2 kids, ages 6 and 4. They'd been saving for 11 years to buy that house. It was their dream home. They took out a bridge loan to cover the gap between selling their current house and buying yours, expecting to close in 30 days. But their buyer fell through when the fraud came to light, and now they're stuck with a loan they can't pay. They've lost their $100,000 deposit, and they're facing possible foreclosure. Jesus, I whispered, can we help them? You can offer restitution beyond what the law requires, pay off their bridge loan, return their deposit, maybe offer additional compensation for their trouble. We're probably talking $400,000 total to make them completely whole, plus some extra for their pain and suffering. Do it, I said immediately. Whatever it takes. They shouldn't suffer because my son is a criminal. Gregory nodded, making notes. That's what I figured you'd say. I'll reach out to their attorney today. We spent the next hour going through every detail of the case. Gregory had prepared a comprehensive timeline of events, bank records, communications, everything the prosecutors would need to build an airtight case. As I was getting ready to leave, Gregory said quietly, Vivienne, I have to ask, are you sure you want to go through with this? Once the federal charges are filed, there's no going back. No changing your mind. No mother's forgiveness that undoes it. Ethan will go to prison. I thought about my son. About the baby I'd held in my arms 29 years ago. About every scraped knee I'd bandaged, every nightmare I'd soothed, every problem I'd solved. About all the times I'd chosen love over consequences, protection over lessons, comfort over growth. And I thought about him sitting on my porch, laughing with the man who'd manipulated him into stealing from me, while my husband lay in a hospital bed fighting for his life. I'm sure, I said. The arrests happened that afternoon. I wasn't there, but Detective Morrison called me with updates. Ethan was picked up at his apartment. Marlena was arrested at a nail salon in Manhattan. Darren was found at a track in Yonkers, placing bets with what was left of my stolen money. All three were charged with conspiracy to commit wire fraud, identity theft, forgery, and money laundering. Federal charges. No bail because of flight risk, and the offshore accounts they'd tried to hide money in. My phone started ringing immediately. Ethan's friends. Marlena's mother, sobbing and begging me to drop the charges. People from my country club who'd heard through the gossip network and wanted to check in, while really just fishing for details. I turned off my phone and drove back to the hospital. Richard was sitting up more today, color better in his face. His surgeon had come by that morning and said his recovery was progressing well. Another week in the hospital, then home for 6 weeks of cardiac rehab. They arrested him, I said, sitting in my usual chair. Richard reached for my hand. We sat like that for a long time, not talking, just being together. Outside the window, the sun was setting over Stamford. Beautiful oranges and pinks painting the sky. I keep thinking about when he was little, Richard said finally. Remember when he was 7 and he broke your favorite vase playing football in the house? I nodded. He cried for an hour, said he was sorry over and over. You told him it was okay, that it was just a thing, that you loved him more than any vase. Richard's voice cracked slightly. Maybe that's where we went wrong. Maybe we should have let him feel the weight of breaking something valuable. Maybe, I said quietly, or maybe some people are just broken in ways love can't fix. We sat together until the nurses kicked me out at 10 o'clock again. I drove back to Westport, made myself eat something even though I wasn't hungry, and tried to sleep. Tomorrow I had to meet with the Mitchells, the couple who'd almost bought my house. Tomorrow I had to start the process of undoing all the damage my son had caused. Tomorrow I had to figure out how to live with the fact that I'd sent my only child to prison. But tonight, I let myself cry. For the baby he'd been. For the man he'd never become. For the mother I'd been who'd loved him so much she'd failed him completely. The meeting with Tom and Jennifer Mitchell was scheduled for 10 o'clock at Gregory's office. I arrived 15 minutes early, which meant I had time to sit in my car in the parking garage and have a minor panic attack about facing the people my son had hurt. I'd seen their photos in the file Gregory sent over. Tom was 34, taught high school history. Jennifer was 32, fourth-grade teacher. Their kids were named Emma and Lucas. They looked like they could be models for a Target catalog, wholesome, happy, young family living the American dream. Until my son had blown that dream apart. Gregory met me in the lobby. They're already here. They're nervous. Be gentle. I'm not the one who hurt them, I said, more defensively than I intended. I know. But you're still connected to the person who did. In their minds, you represent everything that went wrong. He was right. I took a deep breath and followed him to the conference room. Tom and Jennifer Mitchell sat on one side of the long table, their attorney, a woman in her 50s named Patricia Chen, beside them. They both stood when I entered, awkward and uncertain. Jennifer's eyes were red like she'd been crying recently. Mr. and Mrs. Mitchell, I said, offering my hand. I'm so deeply sorry for what my son did to you. Tom shook my hand first. His grip was firm, but his palm was sweaty. Mrs. Hartwell, thank you for meeting with us. Jennifer's handshake was limper, and she wouldn't quite meet my eyes. We all sat down, the table suddenly feeling like a canyon between us. Gregory opened his briefcase and pulled out documents. Mrs. Hartwell has asked me to present an offer of complete restitution and additional compensation for the damages caused by the fraudulent sale. He slid papers across to Patricia Chen, who began reviewing them. Tom and Jennifer sat very still, hands clasped together on the table. I'm offering to return your full $100,000 deposit, I said, my voice steady even though my hands were shaking in my lap. Plus pay off your bridge loan in full, That's $243,000, according to the documents your attorney provided, and an additional $100,000 for your trouble, your time, and the emotional distress this has caused your family. Jennifer's eyes widened. Tom looked at his attorney, confused. I don't understand. Why would you do that? Your son stole from you too. Because you did nothing wrong, I said simply. You saved for 11 years for that house. You brought your children to see it, probably let them pick out their bedrooms, imagined your life there, and then my son's criminality destroyed all of that. You shouldn't have to suffer because I raised a thief. Jennifer made a small sound, almost like a sob. Tom put his arm around her shoulders. Patricia Chen looked up from the documents. This is very generous, Mrs. Hartwell, almost too generous. My clients and I need to discuss whether there are any strings attached. No strings, I said. No non-disclosure agreements, no gag orders, no requirements that you don't testify against my son. In fact, I hope you do testify. I want him to face every consequence of what he did, and that includes looking you in the eyes and knowing exactly who he hurt. There was a long silence. Then Jennifer said quietly, Can I ask you something? Of course. Why did he do it? Her voice broke. We read the police reports. He was trying to pay off gambling debts for his father-in-law, but you have money. Real money. Couldn't he have just asked you for help? It was the question I'd been asking myself for days. Yes, I said. He could have. I would have helped. I've always helped him, every single time he's asked. And that's probably why he thought he could do this. Because I'd taught him his entire life that there were no real consequences, not for him, that I would always fix everything, always make problems disappear with money. That's not your fault, Tom said, surprising me. He's an adult. He made his own choices. Did he? I looked at both of them. Or did I make him incapable of making good choices by never letting him fail, never letting him struggle, never teaching him that actions have consequences? I've been asking myself that question constantly, and I don't have a good answer. Jennifer wiped her eyes. Our kids are 6 and 4. We're trying so hard to raise them right, to teach them values and responsibility. But it's hard. You want to give them everything, protect them from everything. How do you know when you're helping and when you're hurting? I don't know, I admitted. I thought I was being a good mother. Turns out I was creating a monster. We sat with that for a moment. Then Patricia Chen cleared her throat. Mrs. Hartwell, my clients would like to accept your offer. With gratitude. Gregory pushed the paperwork forward. We spent the next 20 minutes signing documents, initiating wire transfers, making everything official. When we finished, we all stood again. Jennifer surprised me by stepping around the table and hugging me. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm sorry you're going through this too. That's when I started crying. Not the angry tears I'd cried in Richard's hospital room. Not the bitter tears I'd cried alone in the Westport house. These were different, softer, sadder. Thank you, I managed to say, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. They left with promises to stay in touch, to let me know when they found another house, to send photos of their kids in their new rooms someday. Gregory walked them out, leaving me alone in the conference room to compose myself. When he came back, he sat across from me. That was hard. Yeah. There's something else we need to discuss. I got a call this morning from Ethan's public defender. I looked up. Already? He wants to make a deal. Ethan's willing to testify against Darren in exchange for a reduced sentence, 5 years instead of 15. My stomach clenched. What about Marlena? She's trying to cut her own deal, claiming she didn't know what was happening, that her father and Ethan kept her in the dark. The prosecutor doesn't believe her, but she's got a decent attorney who's making noise about her being a victim of domestic manipulation. That's bullshit, I said flatly. She was taking selfies on the porch, celebrating with them. She spent $100,000 of stolen money on designer clothes and veneers. I know. But juries sometimes sympathize with pretty young women who cry on the stand. The prosecutor is trying to decide if it's worth fighting or if they should offer her a deal too. I stood up and walked to the window. 19 floors below, people were going about their normal lives, getting coffee, walking to lunch, not dealing with the fact that their only child was in federal custody facing a decade in prison. "What do you think I should do?" I asked Gregory. "About the deals? You don't have any say in it, Viv. The prosecutor makes those decisions. But they'll ask my opinion, as the victim." Gregory was quiet for a moment. "Do you want Ethan to go to prison for 15 years? Or would 5 years be enough?" I thought about my son, about who he was and who he might become, about whether 5 years would teach him what 15 years would teach him, about whether any amount of time in a cage could fix what was broken inside him. "I don't know," I said finally. "I honestly don't know." "Then tell the prosecutor that. Tell them you trust their judgment. Let the justice system do its job." I turned back to face him. What if they get it wrong? What if 5 years isn't enough and he comes out and does this to someone else? What if 15 years destroys him completely and he never recovers? Then that's on him, not you. You didn't put him in this position. He did. But it didn't feel that way. It felt like every choice I'd ever made as a mother had led directly to this moment. Every time I'd bailed him out, every time I'd solved his problems, every time I'd chosen his comfort over his growth. This was my fault, not the crime itself. That was Ethan's choice. But the man who'd made that choice? I'd created him. "I need to see him," I said suddenly. "I need to talk to Ethan." Gregory looked concerned. "Viv, I don't think that's a good idea. Anything you say to him can be used in court. And emotionally—" "I need to see my son," I said firmly. "Set it up." The Federal Detention Center in Manhattan was nothing like the police stations I'd been to. This was serious. Gray concrete walls, multiple security checkpoints, guards who looked at me with a mixture of pity and suspicion when they processed my visitor credentials. They made me leave everything in a locker: phone, purse, jewelry, even my wedding ring. I felt naked without it, kept twisting the bare finger as I waited in a sterile room with fluorescent lights and plastic chairs bolted to the floor. Gregory had argued with me for 2 hours about coming here. "You don't owe him this," he'd said, "and anything you say can complicate the case." But I wasn't here for the case. I was here because despite everything, the theft, the betrayal, the lies, he was still my son. And I needed to understand. I needed to look him in the eyes and ask him why. The door opened and a guard brought Ethan in. He was wearing an orange jumpsuit that was too big for him, his hands cuffed in front of his body. He'd lost weight in just the 4 days since his arrest. His face was pale, unshaven, and his eyes were bloodshot like he hadn't slept. When he saw me, his face crumpled. "Mom." The guard uncuffed him and pointed to the chair across from me. 30 minutes. Keep your hands where I can see them." Then he stepped outside, though I could see his silhouette through the reinforced glass window in the door. Ethan sat down slowly, like an old man. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. We just looked at each other across the metal table. "You look terrible," I said finally. "I'm in federal prison, Mom. I'm not exactly sleeping great." His voice was hoarse, defensive. "Are they treating you okay? Are you safe?" He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Are you seriously asking me that? You're the one who put me here." "No," I said firmly. "You put yourself here. I just didn't let you get away with it this time." Ethan's jaw clenched. "So that's how you're going to play this? The righteous victim? You act like I'm some kind of monster, but all I did was try to help someone. Darren was going to die, Mom. They were going to kill him." "Then you should have called the police. Let him face the consequences of his own gambling addiction, not steal $2 million from me." "It wasn't stealing. It was the house. You have like 6 other houses. What's one house to you?" There it was, the entitlement I'd spent 29 years cultivating. What's one house to me? I repeated slowly. That house was the first property I ever bought with my own money. I was 30 years old, barely making it, and I scraped together every penny for the down payment. I restored it myself, Ethan. Every room, every detail. That house represented everything I'd built from nothing. I didn't know that, he mumbled. Yes, you did. I told you that story 100 times growing up. You just never listened because it didn't matter to you. Nothing I built mattered to you except what you could take from it. Ethan's eyes flashed with anger. That's not fair. You always threw your success in my face. Look what I built from nothing. Look how hard I worked. You made me feel like shit for not being like you. I never said that. I never once compared you to me. You didn't have to. It was always there, hanging over everything. Perfect Vivian, who escaped poverty and built an empire. What was I supposed to do with that? How was I supposed to compete with that? I stared at my son, seeing him clearly, maybe for the first time in years. You were never supposed to compete with me, Ethan. You were supposed to be yourself, build your own life, make your own choices. I told you I loved you no matter what, 1,000 times. While handing me checks to solve all my problems, he shot back, you never let me fail, never let me figure anything out on my own. And then you acted surprised when I didn't know how to be an adult. The words hit me like a physical blow because they were true. You're right, I said quietly. I did that. I protected you too much. I solved problems I should have let you solve. I made you dependent on me, and that was wrong. Ethan blinked, clearly not expecting me to agree. So you admit it. You ruined me. I admit I made mistakes as a parent, big mistakes. But Ethan, you're 29 years old. At some point, you have to take responsibility for who you are and what you do. I gave you too much help, yes, but I didn't make you forge documents. I didn't make you steal from me. I didn't make you celebrate with Darren on the porch while your father was in the hospital. I wasn't celebrating, he said, but his voice was weak. We were just relieved that it worked out, that Darren was safe. You were drinking beer and laughing while I'd spent 3 weeks watching your father almost die. Do you have any idea what that was like for me? Do you even care? Ethan looked down at his hands. I care about Dad. I visited him. Twice. You visited twice in 3 weeks. 20 minutes each time. I had work. Stop lying. My voice came out louder than I intended. The guard's shadow shifted in the doorway. I took a breath, lowered my voice. Please, Ethan. For once in your life, just stop lying. Stop making excuses. Stop blaming everyone else. Just tell me the truth. Why did you do this? The silence stretched out between us. I could hear the ventilation system humming, voices echoing somewhere down the corridor, my own heartbeat in my ears. When Ethan finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Because I'm tired. Tired of what? Of being your son. He looked up at me, and his eyes were wet. Do you know what it's like growing up as Vivian Hartwell's kid? Everyone expects you to be brilliant, successful, driven, teachers, friends, dad, everyone. They all look at me and see your genetics and your money, and they think I should be something special. You are special. No, I'm not. He slammed his hands on the table. The guard opened the door, but I waved him off. Ethan continued, quieter now. I'm not special. I'm not brilliant. I'm average, Mom. Maybe below average. And living in your shadow my whole life, being the disappointing son of an exceptional woman, it's exhausting. I felt tears starting to fall down my face. I never thought you were disappointing. I never wanted you to be me. I just wanted you to be happy. But you kept giving me money, kept solving my problems, and every check you wrote was a reminder that I couldn't do it myself, that I needed Mommy to save me. Do you know how humiliating that is? Then why did you keep taking the money? Because I'm weak. He was crying now too. Because it was easier than actually trying and failing. Because you made it so easy to just keep taking and never having to grow up. We both sat there crying across from each other, mother and son. So much love between us and so much damage. Darren saw that, Ethan said after a while. He saw how weak I was, how desperate I was to prove I could be something. He said selling the house was a way to finally step up, be a man, solve a real problem without running to mommy. He made it sound like I was doing something brave. He manipulated you. Yeah, he did, but I let him. I wanted to believe him because it felt better than admitting I was just stealing from my own mother. I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand. Your lawyer says you're making a deal, testifying against Darren. Ethan nodded. 5 years instead of 15. They said with good behavior, I could be out in 3.5. And Marlena? His face hardened. She's trying to claim she didn't know anything. That's bullshit. She knew everything. She helped plan it. She spent the money just as fast as I did. He paused. We're getting divorced. Her lawyer served me papers yesterday. I'm sorry, I said, and I meant it. Despite everything, I knew he'd loved her. Don't be. She never loved me. She loved the money, the lifestyle, having a rich mother-in-law she could manipulate. He laughed bitterly. Guess we were both being used. What are you going to do? After prison, I mean. Ethan was quiet for a long time. I don't know. The prosecutor said part of my deal is that I can't contact you for 5 years after my release. No calls, no letters, nothing. They want to make sure I can't manipulate you into giving me more money. The words felt like a knife in my chest. 8.5 years minimum before I could talk to my son again. Before I could know if he was okay, if he'd learned anything, if he'd changed. Maybe that's good, he said, seeing my expression. Maybe I need to learn how to be a person without you there to catch me. Learn how to actually fall and get back up on my own. Maybe, I whispered. Mom, Ethan said, his voice breaking. I'm really sorry. I know that doesn't mean much. I know sorry doesn't fix what I did, or give you back the time, or undo the hurt. But I am sorry. Not just because I got caught. I'm sorry for being the kind of person who would do this to you. I reached across the table and took his hand. The guard shifted but didn't intervene. I'm sorry too. I'm sorry I didn't let you grow up. I'm sorry I taught you that love means never facing consequences. I'm sorry I failed you as a mother. You didn't fail me, Ethan said. You loved me too much. That's different. Is it? He smiled sadly. I don't know. Maybe I'll figure that out in prison. Got nothing but time to think about it. The guard knocked on the door. 5 minutes. We sat holding hands across the table. I memorized his face, the shape of his nose that he got from Richard, the curve of his chin that was all mine, the sad eyes that held both our genetics and his own choices. Will you do something for me? I asked. What? Use this time. Really use it. Get therapy. Get education. Figure out who you want to be when you get out. Don't waste these years just being angry or bitter. I'll try, he said. I promise I'll try. And Ethan, I love you, no matter what. That doesn't mean I'll bail you out or give you money or fix your problems ever again. But I love you. You need to know that. I know, he whispered. I love you too, Mom. The guard opened the door. Time's up. Ethan stood. I stood. We looked at each other across the table one more time. Take care of Dad, Ethan said. Tell him I'm sorry. Tell him I finally understand what he was trying to teach me all those years. I will. They cuffed him again and led him toward the door. At the threshold, he turned back. Mom, thank you for not letting me get away with it. For the first time in my life, I'm facing real consequences. It's terrifying, but maybe it's what I always needed. Then he was gone, the door closing behind him with a heavy metallic sound that echoed in my chest. I collected my belongings from the locker, drove back to Westport in a daze, called Richard from the car and told him everything Ethan had said. "He's right, you know," Richard said when I finished. "We did love him too much, or at least we loved him wrong. I don't know if there's a right way to love someone who's determined to destroy themselves," I said. "Maybe not. But maybe now he has a chance to figure out how to stop." I pulled into the driveway of the Westport house and sat in the car, engine off, watching the sun set over Long Island Sound. My phone buzzed. A text from Gregory. "Prosecutor accepted Ethan's deal. 5 years, eligible for early release with good behavior. Darren got 12 years, no possibility of parole for at least 8. Marlena's deal fell through. Jury selection starts in 6 weeks. She'll probably get 6 to 8 years." I typed back, "Thank you for everything." Then I went inside, poured myself a glass of wine I didn't really want, and sat on the deck watching the water turn from blue to gray to black as night fell. Somewhere in Manhattan, my son was in a cell. Somewhere in that same building, the man who'd manipulated him was in another cell. And somewhere in a different facility, his ex-wife was probably crying and cursing my name. But I wasn't crying anymore. I felt something else. Something that might have been peace, or might have been just exhaustion so deep it felt like peace. I'd done what needed to be done. I'd let my son face consequences. I'd stopped the cycle of enabling that had defined our relationship for nearly 3 decades. It hurt. God, it hurt so much. But it was right. And maybe, just maybe, it would save him in the end. 6 months later, I stood in the living room of the Westport house watching Richard arrange furniture. His cardiologist had cleared him for light activity 3 weeks ago, and he'd immediately thrown himself into making this house feel like home. Our home now, not just an investment property. "That couch needs to go 3 inches to the left," I said from the doorway. Richard straightened up, hand on his lower back. "You've said that 4 times. It's fine where it is. It's not centered with the window. Viv, it's a couch. It doesn't need to be perfect." But he shifted it 3 inches to the left anyway, because after 33 years of marriage, he knew which battles to fight. I smiled and walked over to help him with the coffee table. We worked in comfortable silence, the kind that comes from decades of partnership, the kind that had survived heart attacks and betrayals and federal prosecutions. My phone buzzed on the kitchen counter, a text from Tom Mitchell with a photo attached. Their family standing in front of a different house, smaller than mine had been, but charming. A Cape Cod style in Darien with a big yard and a treehouse visible in the back. "We closed yesterday," the text read. "Emma and Lucas are already fighting over who gets the bigger bedroom. Thank you again for everything. You gave us our dream back." I showed the photo to Richard. He smiled. "That's good. They deserved a happy ending. They deserved to not be victims of my son's crime in the first place," I said. "True, but you made it right. That counts for something." I'd done more than just restore their deposit and pay their bridge loan. I'd also quietly arranged for their mortgage to have a significantly lower interest rate through some connections I had at the bank. They'd never know I was behind it, and that was fine. Some things you do because they're right, not because you want credit. The doorbell rang. Gregory Sterling, right on time for our monthly check-in. These meetings had become routine over the past 6 months, reviewing the legal aftermath, handling the civil suits, managing the fallout. We sat at the kitchen table with coffee. Gregory spread out papers. "Okay, good news first. The Mitchells' civil suit has been officially withdrawn. They're satisfied with the restitution you provided." "And the bad news?" "Darren's ex-wife in Nevada, the one from his first marriage that we didn't know about, she's filed a civil suit claiming you should have known about Ethan's fraud sooner and stopped it before her alimony payments dried up." I stared at him. "How is that possibly my responsibility?" "It's not. It's a nuisance suit. She's hoping you'll settle just to make it go away. I recommend we fight it." "Agreed. What else?" "Marlena's trial is scheduled for next month. The prosecutor wants to know if you'll testify." I'd been dreading this question. What would I need to say? Just the facts. When you discovered the fraud, what Marlena said, the selfies she was taking, her spending patterns after the sale. Nothing emotional, just evidence. Will Ethan have to testify? He already gave his deposition. He was honest about her involvement, said she knew everything from the beginning and actively encouraged it. I thought about the girl Ethan had brought home 3 years ago. Pretty, charming, ambitious in a shallow sort of way. I'd known she wasn't right for him, but I'd kept quiet because he was in love, and I'd learned the hard way that you can't choose your children's spouses. I'll testify, I said. She needs to face consequences too. Gregory made a note. The prosecutor will prep you next week. It should be straightforward. After he left, Richard and I made dinner together. Nothing fancy, grilled salmon, roasted vegetables, a salad. Normal people food in our normal new house. The Greenwich Victorian had been sold properly this time to a family who'd waited patiently through the legal mess. I'd let it go for less than market value because I just wanted it gone, wanted that chapter closed. I got a letter today, Richard said as we were cleaning up. From Ethan. I froze with a plate in my hand. What did it say? He's doing okay. Taking college classes through a prison program, got a job in the library, seeing a therapist twice a week. Richard pulled the letter from his pocket and handed it to me. I dried my hands and read it. Ethan's handwriting was neater than I remembered, like he was taking his time with each word. The letter was 3 pages long, mostly about his daily routine, the books he was reading, what he was learning in therapy. The last paragraph made my throat tight. Dad, I know I can't contact Mom directly, and I understand why. But if you talk to her, can you tell her something for me? Tell her I'm learning what it means to stand on my own, to make decisions without a safety net, to face consequences without someone swooping in to fix things. It's hard. Some days I hate it. But I think it's making me into someone better than who I was. Someone she might actually be proud of someday. I love you both. I'm sorry for everything. E. I folded the letter carefully and handed it back to Richard. You can write him back. Tell him I am proud of him, for doing the work, for facing it. You could write him yourself. The restriction is about him initiating contact. You can reach out if you want. I thought about that for a long moment. No. He's right that he needs to do this without me. If I start writing to him, it becomes about our relationship again, about him performing for my approval. He needs to figure out who he is without that dynamic. Richard nodded slowly. When did you get so wise? When I realized that loving someone doesn't mean making their life easy. Sometimes it means stepping back and letting them struggle. That night, I sat on the deck again with my wine. This had become my routine. End of the day, glass of wine, watching the water. Richard usually joined me, but tonight he'd gone to bed early. His stamina was still building back after the surgery. My phone rang, a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Mrs. Hartwell, this is Dr. Sarah Chen from the Federal Correctional Institution. I'm the psychologist working with your son. My heart rate spiked. Is he okay? Did something happen? He's fine, she said quickly. I'm calling because he signed a release allowing me to speak with you. I wanted to update you on his progress. I sat down heavily in one of the deck chairs. Okay. Ethan has been an exemplary participant in our rehabilitation program. He's taken full responsibility for his actions, which is rare. Most inmates spend years blaming others. But Ethan has done genuine work examining his choices and the patterns that led to them. That's good, I managed to say. Mrs. Hartwell, I've been doing this for 18 years. I've seen thousands of inmates. Most of them will reoffend within 5 years of release. But every once in a while you see someone who genuinely changes, someone who uses their time inside to become a different person. I think Ethan is one of those people. I felt tears starting. Thank you for telling me that. He talks about you a lot in therapy. about how you enabled his dependence, but also about how you loved him enough to let him fall. He's processing a lot of complicated feelings about your relationship. It's healthy, painful, but healthy. Can you tell him something for me? Of course. Tell him I'm learning too, learning how to love him better, learning the difference between helping and hurting. Tell him I'll be here when he gets out, but not as his safety net, as his mother who believes he can stand on his own. I'll tell him, Dr. Chen said. He'll appreciate hearing that. After she hung up, I sat in the dark for a long time. The water was calm tonight, just small ripples catching moonlight. Somewhere across the country, Ethan was in his cell, reading or studying or thinking. Somewhere in another facility, Marlena was awaiting trial. Darren was serving his 12 years, probably already planning his next scheme for when he got out. But that wasn't my problem anymore. None of it was my problem, except healing from it. Richard came out onto the deck in his pajamas. Thought you might want company. I smiled up at him. Always. He sat next to me and took my hand. We looked out at the water together. This man who'd loved me through 3 decades of mistakes and growth, who'd tried to warn me about protecting Ethan too much, who'd supported me even when I wouldn't listen. Do you think he'll make it? I asked quietly. When he gets out? Do you think he'll actually be different? I don't know, Richard said honestly. But I think he has a chance now. A real chance. And that's more than he had before. I keep thinking about all the things I did wrong, all the ways I failed him. You didn't fail him, Viv. You loved him. Maybe too much, maybe in the wrong ways sometimes. But you loved him. And now you're loving him enough to let him find his own way. That takes courage. I leaned my head on his shoulder. I'm tired, Richard. I'm so tired of feeling guilty and sad and angry all at once. I know, but it'll get easier. Day by day, it'll hurt less. He was right. It was already hurting less than it had 6 months ago. The sharp edge of betrayal had dulled to a steady ache. The rage had cooled to something like resignation. And underneath it all, there was still love. Complicated, painful, but real. My son had stolen from me, had betrayed me at my most vulnerable moment, had chosen a con artist over his own mother, and I'd done what I never thought I could do. I'd let him face the full consequences of those choices. It had cost me. Sleepless nights, endless guilt, questions from friends and family about whether I was being too harsh, whispers at the country club about the woman who'd sent her own son to prison. But I'd also gained something. Self-respect, boundaries, the knowledge that love doesn't mean sacrificing yourself on the altar of someone else's bad choices, even when that someone is your child. Come to bed, Richard said, standing and offering me his hand. Tomorrow's a new day. I took his hand and let him pull me up. We walked inside together, turning off lights, locking doors, getting ready for sleep. And for the first time in months, I slept through the night without nightmares about what I'd lost or fears about what came next. Because I'd learned the hardest lesson a mother can learn. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let go. Let them fall. Let them face their consequences. Let them become who they need to become without you there to catch them. Even when it breaks your heart. Especially when it breaks your heart.